Welcome back to Couch Talk, everybody. I'm Joe, and I just spent the weekend watching the new Netflix original, Apostle. I watched it on Friday with my friend, and then I watched it again today, Sunday, with my girlfriend because she really wanted to see it because the star, Dan Stevens, was also the person that played Beast in Beauty and the Beast, and she likes him and his eyes. Anyway, this movie is directed by Gareth Evans. He also did the Raid franchise. I have a trailer reaction for this movie, and I go into further details about that whole thing. So if you want to know my thoughts on him deeply, like what I really think about him, go and watch that. But I think he's a fantastic director. He does great fight scenes, and I love the Raid movies. They are foreign, so you'd have to watch them with subtitles, but they're definitely worth checking out. Anyway, this movie is pretty much Dan Stevens plays a character by the name of Thomas Richardson, and his sister gets kidnapped by a religious cult who fled the motherlands in the early 1900s to cultivate life elsewhere and create their own society away from the government and taxes and everything. And they kidnap his sister and hold her for ransom because, all of their crops are dying and they need the money to help, bring their crops back and flourish and not starve to death. And they're hoping that her father will come there and pay the ransom, and in turn, they could use that money. But instead, he goes and infiltrates the cult, tries to figure out where his sister is and free her. Um, Gareth Evans is really good at action, but there is not a lot of action in this movie. This movie is a lot more thriller horror, more like his earlier work in one of the VHS movies that was also a lower budgeted indie movie. There is a little bit of action sprinkled in here, but not much. Essentially, the movie in a whole is just a giant metaphor for Mother Nature. I'm not going to go into super spoilers because chances are, if you're watching this, you've seen the movie, so you know what happens. Yeah, essentially, he finds out that the island is actually being run by a deity, the god, the mother of the island. By feeding her blood, she is essentially, feeding the island in return and, making it flourish and making everything green and making the flowers grow and making the crops all nice and ripe and everything. But over time, being held captive and forced, to do all these things against her will for humans' own selfish desires, she starts to revolt and destroy the crops, and they start to rot, and everything's dying around them. And he fights his way through the cult, and eventually finds her, and they share a touching moment where she pretty much says, like, "I've been waiting for you, my son," and she, like, holds him for a second, and they share this very intimate but awkward connection in, like, a moment. And then he lights her on fire, which then catches to the village. And Stevens then has an epic fight with, Michael Sheen's right hand man. Michael Sheen is the religious cult leader, and he had, like, this, like, right hand guy. You'd know if you've seen it, but that essentially, lost his mind and seized control from Michael Sheen and, like, started, like, torturing people and drilling holes in people's heads. And I don't know, it was some crazy shit. This movie was fucked up, but in all the right ways. Anyway, so yeah, Dan Stevens, he kills that guy, but he gets mortally wounded in the process. And then as he's dying at the very end of the movie, after he gets his sister onto the boat, he's laying in the grass, and his blood is now, going into the grass and making the grass grow, and everything's turning green again. And you now find out that Dan Stevens has now become the new deity of this island. Which, I mean, take it as you will. You could look at this as a sad ending because he dies and becomes one with the island, or you could take it as a good ending because, he says in the movie that he was a priest, he was a man of faith, but when he was tortured and beaten, he lost his faith. And now he has a purpose again. The whole movie he was very miserable and very quiet and angry because he had nothing to believe in, but now, he's met this God and he's able to just become one with the earth and have a purpose, and he's smiling. But then you see Michael Sheen's character turn and look, and he realizes what's happening, and that Dan Stevens' character has the ability to feed the island from himself, and that he is now the new deity, and he smiles. The way I take that is he's going to continue what he's always done, and he's going to abuse this privilege that he gets from having somebody that could flourish his island, and he is going to squeeze every possible ounce of life out of Dan Stevens to help his own selfish desires. It is a metaphor for what we do to Mother Nature. It is an endless cycle of violence and destruction. You know, this whole town just burned down, hundreds of people died, there was a big massacre, and the only thing that Michael Sheen wants to do is now use Dan Stevens to do the same thing he's always done, to make a new society there, bring more people there, and use Dan Stevens to, pretty much grow crops and, flowers and everything, and just have a flourishing society. Like, he just won't learn his lesson from the woman that they were using, referring to as her, the original deity. And it's exactly like what we do to Mother Nature. We create factories, and we destroy our ozone layer with all the smoke and smog, and we mass produce like fake chickens to like feed the enormous population of people we have that want chicken. And we litter and we pollute, and we're cutting trees down to make furniture, and then we wonder why we hear on the news that we only have 100 years left on this planet before it is inhabitable, which is why they're trying to send people to Mars and everything. And we hear all these signs, but we don't care because we're selfish and we want to advance in society, but it is at our home's destruction. And it's never going to stop. It's going to keep happening until Earth is destroyed. And that's essentially what was happening in this movie. Even though everything went to shit, Michael Sheen still wants to try. And it is just a reflection of us. And I think it is such an incredible accomplishment for Gareth Evans to incorporate this message into this movie. And I think that because I don't really care a whole lot for politics. I mean, I care that our president's an idiot and that our planet is dying or whatever, but I don't watch documentaries on it. That's just not my stuff. It's not my cup of tea. But it's like, it brings me back to this thing that my grandma used to say to me when I was little. When I would study for tests and stuff, I would always go in to take the test the next day and I would fail miserably. And it's not for lack of reading and trying and studying the night before, but I always had a problem with, if I didn't care about something, I couldn't absorb the information in my head, and it would, just go in one ear and out the other, and I would go in and I would fail. But then I would hear a song that I liked or watch a movie that I liked, and I would remember the lyrics or a famous quote from the movie or whatever. And she used to say to me, I wish you could learn your schoolwork as good as you learn quotes and lyrics from movies and songs. That's kind of what I feel like Gareth Evans was going for with this. He's taking this very serious message that he wants to get across, and he's masking it in this horror thriller that has a very deep metaphorical meaning. And for someone like me that doesn't really like to read up on everybody else, it's nice to get that message across through a means that is interesting to me. Like, this whole movie is interesting to me. I mean, I love, like, violent movies, like bloody, gory shit. Like, I love horror, and I like a good mystery thriller, which this is pretty much a mystery thriller, violent horror action movie, because there was a sprinkle of action in there. But with a very serious message behind it. And that's the perfect way to get it across to somebody that isn't very political and doesn't follow all that stuff. And I think that he could hide it that well inside this movie and still have people that don't care about that stuff watching it and enjoying it is just an incredible accomplishment. And it is a shame that he, is making this for Netflix. Not that I have anything against Netflix, but I think he is such a unique and story-driven director, even though he really only does fight scenes. Like, he definitely has a lot to say up here. And, I mean, yes, Netflix has a big viewership, but it will never get the praise that a movie would get being in the movie theater, where I think this guy definitely deserves to be. He deserves to be getting reviewed by all the big shots, Forbes and the New York Times. And I think one of them did review this, but it was like a very small article. Like, they just don't, these Netflix movies don't get the popularity and publicity that it deserves. And, Gareth Evans was actually attached to direct the Deathstroke movie for DC, but once that all fell apart and they, started reworking the DC stuff, I don't know if we're going to get that anymore, but I hope they still keep him on to make a movie, because his choreography that he does in the Raid movies are just out of this world. It's like a dance, and it's so beautiful, and it's no shaky cam, and I love it. And I would really like to see him bring this stuff to modern audiences and movie theaters, so more people are aware of this guy, because he's just such a great director. I really don't have any problems with this movie. The only thing I do have a problem with is that this movie isn't an action movie, and none of these people are mixed martial artists. So when there is a little bit of action, you could see his stylistic filming start to take over, and a fight scene between a young kid that doesn't know how to fight and an old man that doesn't know how to fight should be kind of sloppy and messy and pushing each other around, and it shouldn't be a coordinated, graceful fight where they're both countering and dodging and weaving. It goes from being really grounded. I mean the movie's about gods and deities, but people are reacting and acting the way that a normal person would act in certain situations, and then when there's a fight scene, it's like they become kung fu masters, and it just didn't fit right. It only happened in one scene between a kid and an older gentleman, Michael Sheen's right hand man. But it felt out of place, and you could see by the way he's like shooting certain things, and he's like doing these like quick cuts, like it's just very stylish, and it just didn't mesh well. And I loved the fight between Dan Stevens and the grinder, or like the guy with like the beehive on his head. I thought that was excellent. But I thought that the very last fight where he kills like the guy that like seized control of the island from Michael Sheen, I thought that was very anticlimactic. It just wasn't as good as I would have liked it to be. I thought there would have been a lot more brutality to it and a little bit more like fists thrown or something. But it all happened very quick, so I was a little disappointed in that. But aside from those two small things, I think that this movie is excellent. I think that the story is excellent. I think that it is one hell of a ride, and it may be a little bit of a slower in the beginning, but the ending is a really good payoff. Dan Stevens brings his A game. I've loved that guy since I've seen him in The Guest. He was also in Beauty and the Beast. He was in a TV show called Downton Abbey. And Michael Sheen is just stellar as well. He really brought his A game here. Those are the only two like really big name actors. But I definitely want to see more from Gareth Evans. I definitely want to see more from Dan Stevens because his performance in this really blew me away. It was just fantastic. I'm going to give this movie a 9 out of 10. It's definitely worth the watch. And I think that this is actually a movie that is worth 2 watches because you're going to go into this not really understanding it, and then you're going to watch it from start to finish. And then once you have kind of a basic concept of what it is, go back and rewatch it with the knowledge that I'm telling you and the knowledge that you learned on your own, and watch it through the eyes of what Gareth Evans was trying to imagine. Because you watch it the first time and you have no idea what the fuck is going on to the end. But then once you watch it and you know what's going on, and you know the metaphor behind it, rewatching it gives you a new perspective on it that really pays off the second time around. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Have you watched this movie yet? If not, has this review changed your mind? I apologize for the spoilers, but I felt I couldn't really do this video without it because this movie just has too powerful of a message, and I couldn't fully grasp this whole review without going into some details. Anyway, let me know what you guys think, and as always, I'll catch you next time.